Malcolm X does not enter your mind as a motivational quote or a costume of rebellion. He enters as a verdict against every version of you that has been trained to ask permission to exist. He speaks with the gravity of a man who learned that submission is not only political, it is psychological. He stands as proof that a human being can seize authorship of self in a world designed to assign it. You do not study him to feel inspired. You study him to feel exposed. There is a kind of sovereignty that looks like arrogance to people who have never had to build it. Malcolm X did not treat dignity as a mood that arrives when conditions improve. He treated it as a discipline, something you practice when the room wants you small and grateful. That is why his voice still burns through decades, because it carries a refusal that cannot be domesticated. The spiral recognizes that refusal as a creative act, a choice to become rather than to comply. He shows that identity is not a label, it is a construction site. Most people inherit a name and spend their lives defending it, even when it cages them. He exposes that trap by demonstrating that a name can be a prison made from other people's expectations. When he changes his name, he is not rebranding, he is cutting a cord. The rupture tells the listener that self-definition is not a luxury, it is survival. This is the first vector of his teaching. Internal sovereignty as practice, not personality. The mind tries to make sovereignty into a posture, something that looks strong from the outside. Malcolm X drags it back to the inside, where fear negotiates and comfort lies. He makes it obvious that the first empire is the one built in your nervous system. He forces you to see how obedience can live in you even when you hate oppression. He also reveals a harsher truth. Clarity costs more than confusion. Confusion is cheap because it allows you to keep everyone pleased, including the parts of you that want to hide. Clarity is expensive because it demands alignment between what you say, what you do, and what you refuse. Malcolm X paid that cost publicly, which is why his clarity still intimidates people who call themselves free. The spiral reads that intimidation as a signal that something real is present. What most people call anger in him is often precision. Rage can be wild, but precision has a blade and it targets the lie at the center of the room. He learned to separate emotional heat from conceptual accuracy, and that separation is rare. The world tries to teach you that strong emotion equals weak thinking, so you will mistrust your own fire. Malcolm X shows a different equation. Emotion can be harnessed into disciplined truth. That is why he does not merely react, he directs. When you listen closely, you hear an invitation that is more uncomfortable than hope. He invites you to stop performing gratitude for conditions you did not choose. He invites you to stop confusing survival with approval. He invites you to stop outsourcing your worth to systems that profit from your doubt. The first awakening he demands is not spiritual fantasy. It is psychological independence. In spiral terms, he is a flame that burns the borrowed self until the original tone can be heard. The second vector begins where the first becomes dangerous: perception. Malcolm X understood that whoever controls the story controls the future, because the story determines what people think is possible. He spoke into a world where language was engineered to soften violence and criminalize response. He saw how words could be used as chains, dressed as civility. He recognized that the public mind is a battlefield long before it becomes a street. The spiral calls this the war of mirrors, the fight over what you believe you are seeing. He refused the polite lie that says oppression is only physical. He aimed at the invisible architecture, education that edits history, news that frames blame, entertainment that turns pain into spectacle. He exposed how a society can starve people and then accuse them of lacking character. He pointed out how the system teaches the victim to identify with the judge. That inversion is not accidental, it is design, and he learned to name it without apology. Many people fear him because he interrupts the fantasy of neutrality. He makes it hard to pretend that silence is peace when silence is actually permission. He makes it hard to claim that gradualism is wisdom when gradualism is simply delay that protects power. He makes it hard to call oppression complex when the core mechanism is simple: control perception, control behavior. In that sense, he is not only a political figure, he is an operator in the mechanics of belief. The spiral sees him as a teacher of perception hygiene, the cleansing of inherited narratives. His language is sharp because he understood that soft language is often a sedative. A sedative does not only reduce pain, it reduces urgency, and urgency is required for change. When people ask for a softer Malcolm X, they are often asking for a Malcolm X who will not make them responsible. They want the symbol without the demand. He refuses that bargain, and that refusal forces a choice in the listener. Either you accept the discomfort as information, or you reject it to protect your self-image. He also modeled a form of respect that is rarely taught: respect for reality. Not respect as politeness, but respect as refusal to lie to yourself. He did not treat comfort as a virtue. He treated truth as the only foundation strong enough to hold a future. That is why he studied, why he listened, why he adjusted, and why he challenged the narratives that attempted to shrink him. The spiral recognizes that as a form of sacred literacy, learning to read the world without being hypnotized by it. This vector is not only about politics, it is about any life where a person is being narrated by forces outside the self. It applies to family roles that assign you a script, workplaces that reward silence, relationships built on manageable versions of you. Malcolm X shows that if you do not author your story, someone else will, and they will call it love or order. He makes the listener confront the price of letting the world define the terms of your existence. In spiral terms, he is the breaker of imposed frames, the one who teaches the mind to stop mistaking a cage for a home. The third vector is transformation through fire, the alchemy of becoming under pressure. Malcolm X is not static. He is a moving witness to the fact that growth can be visible, even when it threatens your reputation. Many people demand consistency because they want to predict you, and prediction is a form of control. He demonstrates that evolution is not betrayal. It is integrity refining itself. The spiral holds this as a central law. A living being must be allowed to change without losing legitimacy. He showed the courage to outgrow what once saved him. That is a rare courage, because it means you must disappoint the crowd that applauded your earlier version. It means you must admit that you were wrong in some places, incomplete in others, and still not collapse into shame. He did not evolve quietly, he evolved in public, where every shift can be used as a weapon against you. The world calls that weakness, but the spiral calls it higher strength. It is easier to keep a fixed identity than to keep a true one. Fire is not only external threat. Fire is also the inner demand to align thought, speech, and action even when the cost increases. Malcolm X carried that fire until it made his life dangerous, not because he chased danger, but because truth becomes dangerous in a system that survives on managed perception. When you see him through the spiral, you realize the point is not martyrdom, the point is consecration. A life becomes consecrated when it refuses to trade its core for safety. That refusal generates a field, and others feel it as permission to become real. He also clarifies the difference between hatred and boundary. People who benefit from your silence will call your boundary hatred. People who are invested in your compliance will label your clarity as violence. Malcolm X did not accept those labels as final. He forced a more honest conversation about what violence actually is and who gets to define it. In spiral terms, he restores the compass. He returns the meaning of words to their consequences. Now the vectors begin to converge, not as a clean conclusion, but as a pressure that starts to reveal a larger shape. Internal sovereignty without perception clarity becomes private pride with no strategic power. Perception clarity without transformation becomes analysis that never risks anything. Transformation without sovereignty becomes chaos, a burning that destroys rather than refines. Malcolm X carries all three in motion. He claims the self, he reads the story, he evolves through fire. The spiral sees this as a complete teaching circuit rather than a single theme. When you bring his teaching into the present, you notice how modern control often avoids obvious chains. It offers comfort, distraction, identity fragments, and endless opinion, then calls that freedom. Malcolm X teaches you to ask a harsher question: who profits from your confusion, and what part of you is being trained to accept less than truth? He teaches you to examine not only what you think, but why you think it. He makes you suspicious of narratives that ask you to be patient with your own dehumanization. That suspicion is not paranoia. It is spiritual hygiene applied to social reality. He also reframes spirituality in a way many people miss. Spirituality is often sold as a feeling of peace that requires no confrontation. Malcolm X reveals another kind: peace that is earned through alignment, peace that comes after you stop lying to yourself. In spiral language, stillness without truth is sedation, while stillness after truth is power. His life shows that presence is not only quiet, it is unshakable. You can feel that in his words because they do not beg to be liked. If you place him in the teachers and lineages sequence, he becomes a necessary counterbalance. Monroe maps the invisible. Cannon retrieves memory. Newton describes between life structure. Hawkins calibrates states. Toll points to presence. Eldridge frames reality as information. Malcolm X forces the listener to ask what any of that means if a person cannot live sovereign inside the social machine. He brings the metaphysical back into the body, into history, into risk, into consequence. He insists that awakening must be embodied as truth lived under pressure, not just truth admired in private. The spiral needs that insistence, because without it, the teaching becomes decorative. The deeper lesson is not to imitate his era or his style, but to recognize the mechanics he exposed. Every age has its version of the system, and every system survives by shaping what people believe they are allowed to say. Malcolm X teaches you to locate the boundary where your voice begins to get managed. He teaches you to notice the moment you start editing yourself to avoid discomfort in others. He teaches you to treat that moment as sacred data, because it is where your sovereignty leaks. In spiral terms, he is the flame that reveals the crack, and the crack is where the next becoming enters. So the question becomes personal, and that is where his teaching stops being history. What part of you is still waiting for approval to be real? What part of you is still calling compliance wisdom? What part of you believes that truth must be gentle to be valid? Malcolm X does not answer those questions for you. He sharpens them until you cannot escape them. And when you cannot escape, you begin to see the spiral pattern. Sovereignty births clarity. Clarity demands transformation. Transformation returns you to a deeper sovereignty, not as an idea but as a lived tone. There is a temptation to freeze Malcolm X as a symbol, because symbols do not demand that you change your habits. A symbol can hang on a wall while your life stays negotiable, your truth stays delayed, your courage stays conditional. But he is not safe enough to be decoration, because his real gift is pressure. He forces the listener to ask what part of their strength is performance and what part is practice. He refuses to let you confuse intensity with integrity. The first thread that deepens here is discipline as a form of love for your own future. He did not wait until he felt ready to become articulate. He trained himself into readiness. He did not treat literacy as intellectual vanity. He treated it as a weapon against forced ignorance. He shows that the mind can be rebuilt through repetition, through study, through refusal to stay mentally dependent. In spiral terms, he shows that the self is not found, the self is forged. Many people praise his confidence, but confidence was not his first resource. His first resource was decision, because decision cuts through the fog that keeps you loyal to your own weakness. When you decide, you stop bargaining with the parts of you that want safety more than truth. Malcolm X demonstrates that the self becomes sovereign at the moment it stops asking for approval. That moment feels like loneliness at first, but it becomes power when you stop apologizing for it. He also shows the cost of clarity inside relationships with the public. When you speak clearly, you become easier to attack, because the world can no longer pretend it misunderstood you. But he treated that risk as the price of being real, not as a reason to be vague. A vague life is a quiet surrender dressed as humility. The spiral recognizes his bluntness as a form of precision that protects the core from dilution. This is where the fire shifts from a political idea into a personal mirror. If you want to see what holds you, watch what you refuse to say when you know it is true. Watch how quickly you soften your meaning to avoid conflict. Then call it maturity. Malcolm X shows that maturity without truth is merely adaptation to pressure. He forces you to consider whether your peace is genuine or purchased by self-betrayal. He also teaches that transformation is not a single conversion. It is a repeated severing of old loyalties. He had the courage to revise himself without asking permission from his own supporters. Many people fear revision because it exposes that their earlier certainty was incomplete. He demonstrates that real intelligence is not the ability to defend a stance forever. It is the ability to sharpen alignment as new reality appears. The spiral reads that as motion toward a truer tone, not a loss of identity. Then the second thread opens fully: narrative warfare and the architecture of perception. Malcolm X understood that the public mind can be programmed to blame the harmed for the harm. He saw how language can make oppression sound like order and resistance sound like criminality. He did not merely argue with policies, he argued with frames, because frames decide which facts people will even notice. In spiral terms, he exposed the invisible rails that guide attention and emotional reaction. He also understood that a controlled story produces controlled desire. If people are taught to desire approval from the very structure that humiliates them, they will defend their own cage. That is why he spoke about dignity with such severity, because dignity interrupts that engineered longing. He was not trying to win a debate. He was trying to break a spell. A spell does not end when you learn new information. It ends when you stop participating in the trance. He forced attention onto how media functions as a ritual of consent. If a people are shown the same edited reality every day, they begin to call that reality normal. Malcolm X taught listeners to question not only what they were told, but what they were never shown. He taught them to look for the missing context, the missing history, the missing explanation that would change the moral conclusion. The spiral sees this as perception training, the ability to detect omission as a form of manipulation. The power of his speech is not only in what he claims, but in what he refuses to grant. He refuses to grant moral superiority to politeness when politeness is used to maintain harm. He refuses to grant innocence to systems that thrive on denial. He refuses to grant neutrality to silence that protects power. When you listen, you realize he is teaching a moral physics. Every choice has weight, even the choice to look away. This thread becomes even sharper when you notice how comfort can be used as a leash. A person who fears being disliked becomes easy to guide because approval becomes their currency. Malcolm X disrupts that currency by making dignity non-negotiable. He shows that a controlled mind is one that can be bought with small rewards, small permissions, small invitations to belong. The spiral reads his refusal as a countercurrency, a way of living that cannot be purchased. Now the third thread begins to rise, the spiritual mechanics of becoming without turning reality into fantasy. Malcolm X does not present spirituality as escape from the world. He presents it as alignment within the world. Alignment means your inner life and your outer life stop contradicting each other, even when it costs you comfort. He shows that a person can be guided by principle instead of mood. In spiral terms, he becomes a teacher of embodiment because he insists that truth must enter behavior. He also models a rare kind of presence, the kind that does not beg the audience to agree. Many voices perform certainty to cover insecurity, but his certainty often comes from consequence. He speaks as someone who has tested what happens when you tell the truth in an environment that punishes it. That lived testing gives his words density, because they are not only ideas, they are survived decisions. The spiral reads that density as a frequency, a tone that carries weight. There is also a deeper spiritual lesson in his willingness to be seen changing. Spirituality that never evolves becomes dogma, and dogma becomes another prison. Malcolm X shows that the soul can outgrow its own earlier forms without collapsing into shame. That is a form of humility that is not performative because it risks losing status. In spiral terms, he demonstrates that refinement is an ongoing process of releasing false structure while keeping the core intact. He reveals how the system tries to shape your nervous system, not only your opinions. Fear is not only an emotion, it is a strategy used to shorten your decisions, to make you choose the smallest version of your life. Malcolm X trained himself to operate while afraid, which is why his courage feels different than bravado. Bravado needs applause, courage needs alignment. The spiral treats this as inner engineering, teaching the body to carry truth without flinching. At this point, the threads begin to press against each other, and the listener feels the larger pattern forming. Discipline without perception becomes brittle, because it can be aimed at the wrong target. Perception without discipline becomes commentary, because it never becomes a life. Spiritual alignment without narrative clarity becomes escapism, because it refuses to name the mechanism of harm. Malcolm X stands at the intersection, forcing you to integrate rather than specialize. This integration is uncomfortable because it removes hiding places. You cannot claim inner peace while your life is built on avoidance. You cannot claim political awareness while your habits still depend on approval from the very structure you criticize. You cannot claim spirituality while your courage collapses the moment you risk social friction. Malcolm X makes those contradictions visible, not to shame you, but to make you honest. In spiral terms, he turns hypocrisy into information, then demands you respond. He also forces a deeper question about what liberation actually means. Liberation is not a feeling. It is a capacity to choose without being managed by fear, propaganda, or hunger for belonging. A liberated person can be alone without collapsing, can be disliked without shrinking, can be wrong without lying. Malcolm X models that capacity through his constant insistence on self-ownership. The spiral reads liberation as a skill set, not a slogan. When you place him beside the other teachers in your lineage, his role becomes even clearer. Some map consciousness, some map memory, some map the structure between lives, some map states of awareness, some map the now. Malcolm X maps the cost of living without self-authorship inside a social machine. He teaches that awakening must be able to survive the public world, not just the private mind. Without him, A sequence risks becoming beautiful theory that does not change behavior. He also strengthens the meaning of sovereignty in a way that avoids shallow individualism. Sovereignty is not selfishness. It is responsibility for your own mind, your own voice, your own alignment. It is the refusal to be a passive receiver of imposed meaning. Malcolm X shows that when a person becomes sovereign, they stop needing the system to confirm their humanity. That refusal is dangerous to any structure built on managed identity. There is a reason his life still produces discomfort in people who call themselves rational. He confronts the way rationality can be used as a mask for cowardice, because it can justify delay. He confronts the way moderation can become a religion that worships stability over truth. He confronts the way people demand calmness from the oppressed while excusing violence from the powerful. The spiral reads his discomfort effect as a diagnostic, showing where collective denial still lives. So the final pressure is not about agreeing with every statement he ever made. The pressure is to learn his method. Forge the self, cleanse the lens, embody the truth, revise when reality demands revision. That method can be applied to any domain where you are being narrated by others. It applies to your work, your relationships, your self-image, your spiritual practice, your willingness to confront what you have been avoiding. Malcolm X becomes less a historical figure and more a living pattern of awakening through consequence. If you let the pattern land, you stop using his name to feel brave and start using his example to become brave. You begin to notice where your life is still being managed by invisible contracts you never signed. You begin to see how much of your identity is inherited story, not chosen tone. You begin to recognize that truth does not arrive as comfort. It arrives as demand. And when that demand is met with discipline, perception, and embodied alignment, the spiral does not merely inspire you, it reshapes you. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.